Where do video games stand as an industry? Believe me when I say, since 2012, the video game industry has been bigger and worth more than both the movies and music industries combined. And now you might be thinking how video games make more than movies at this point. The journey of the video game has been extraordinary, especially in the past 2 decades. The earliest games were solely focused on the competitiveness and the gameplay, like Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and etc. But in the recent years, the games have been more story-driven and entertaining, thus attracting more audience and the admirers. To be honest, some of the stories and the plots in the modern-day games are more interesting than some of the mainstream movies out there. Imagine such a good game with a good potential plot, and imagine a whole series of them. That's where the current video game status stand. With tens and hundreds of successful games, franchises reigning the industry and even influencing the other industries. The best example for this is the good old Resident Evil franchise. The birth of the Resident Evil franchise dates back to 1993. The game was inspired by Capcom's survival horror game Sweet Home, and was initially released in Japan as Biohazard in 1993. The game was then set to release in the Western market, but publishers faced copyright issues with the name Biohazard, as there was already a game under the name and also a band. So Capcom took up the challenge of rebranding the name and simply held a competition inside the company to come up with a name. Ultimately, the name Resident Evil has come up, and the game debuted in 1996. How well did the game actually go? Well, the game was very well received in the Western market, being bestsellers in both North America and the United Kingdom. The original game sold around 2.75 million units, with more than 2+ million in other versions, becoming of the best-selling PlayStation game of all time. Now, why Resident Evil is so important is that it wasn't just the start of the great franchise, but also the start of the whole new genre in the gaming world, survival horror. The game even went on to win a few awards as well, including Sony's best PlayStation game overall. The publishers and the developers couldn't resist to go for a sequel after the success of the first game, the very first brick to one of the biggest game franchises in the history. Since the year of the first game's release, Capcom has already taken the first step to turning the title into a big entertainment franchise. As time went on, more games, sequels were released, and more comic books and novels were released. Films were also made in the series' name, including the in-game characters, stories, and the plot. Animated movies and live-action movies, and here's just another interesting fact, that the Resident Evil series held records for the most successful movie series based on a video game, and also for the most live-action film adaptation of a video game. Over the course of 25 years, Capcom has released over 9 main titles and over 15 standalone titles alone for this game, including the upcoming Resident Evil 3 Remake, and over 6 live-action movies, 4 animated movies, 7 books, novels, and currently the biggest game franchise of the company. However, in the past couple of years, Capcom has been taking a whole new approach in the further development of the series. Instead of releasing a brand new title, they have been remaking old games with current-gen graphics and physics. And to be honest, it is a pretty good move, and it has been going really well, and the fans are loving it. With this remaking or remastering strategy, Capcom has found a new way to expand the title even more without risking anything. The first remake date back to 2002, when the original game was remade with better graphics and audio for the GameCube console. People absolutely loved the new version, but it took another 13 years to get the original game's remaster to the current gen console and a PC, named Resident Evil HD Remaster. So this can be considered as the first legitimate remaster of the game series, and the numbers say it was a huge success. Over 2.4 million copies were sold worldwide, and this opened a door for Capcom to look at their future games differently and bring more remasters. After seeing how the first remake sold millions, Capcom announced that they were working on another remake for the second main title of the series, Resident Evil 2. Capcom spent around 3 years on the remake of the 1998 original game Resident Evil 2. Finally, the game was released in January 2019 and made history by the end of the year. The remake sold over 5 million copies by the end of 2019, outselling the original Resident Evil 2 game, confirming the success of the Capcom's approach of the remastering or remaking the previous games. How do you feel when a 20-year-old game still being worthy of an award as a Game of the Year? It's just insane and proves how good the Resident Evil franchise really is. So after seeing the success these two remakes, Capcom didn't hesitate to do another one, but the next remake was announced sooner than expected. With the previous remakes selling like crazy, Capcom revealed a Resident Evil 3 remake just before 2019 ended, and was set to be released within a comparatively very low time window. The release date being April 3rd, 2020. This again confirms how successful the remakes have been and how eager and invested Capcom is in the remastering the classics. Since the way things are going, will the Resident Evil 4 remake be coming? And was the original game a success to be remade at all? So most of you might be familiar with the Resident Evil series. For those who aren't really familiar with the series, Resident Evil is a horror survival game where the characters survive through the zombie apocalypse. The series had many different gameplay styles and approaches to the gameplay and the mechanics over the course of the series. The first two games had a tank control system in which the player's movement is directly related to the positioning of the character. The character simply moves the direction they are facing when their respective control keys are being pressed. The cameras were also less dynamic, and the gameplay felt weird as the camera moved from one fixed position to another as you moved around. If you try to play the first two original games today, you might find it somewhat unplayable and odd, having played newer versions of the series, of course. These first two titles were rather horror-based and puzzle-based and delivered the two aspects perfectly. In the third official title, the game was given a little bit more action with the dodging mechanics. However, with the Resident Evil 4, the series took a complete turn into becoming what a current-gen action-filled games of the series are today. Resident Evil 4 was the first of the series to introduce a third-person perspective to the franchise. The game was more action-orientated than any of the previous titles. The game still stuck to its puzzle-solving gameplay style, but the critics say that the introduction of the new third-person perspective and more action made the game less scary. Nevertheless, Resident Evil 4 still stood out to be one of the best games of the series. Talking about the gameplay, as I mentioned before, the game was set in a third-person perspective. This was clearly in intention of having more action to the game. The game focused more on shootouts with the added difficulty by creatively merging the ammo with the gameplay. Also, the enemies' reactions and the interactions to the game's fighting mechanics were also brilliant. You could shoot up an enemy's feet to make them stumble, or shoot at their arms to make them drop the weapons, or even shoot down the axes and the other objects thrown at the player. Yes, you guessed it right, the enemies were more advanced and harder to kill, and brought in a whole level of difficulty to the game as the zombies were able to work together and even throw stuff at you. Also, your loot can be sold to merchants in the different locations and upgrade or buy new weapons in which has their own perks affecting the gameplay experience. The story of the Resident Evil 4 takes place 6 years after the events of the Resident Evil 2. Leon is on a mission to rescue Ashley Graham, who is the daughter of the president kidnapped by cult. He travels to a village in Spain where he finds the cult, Los Iluminados, who kidnapped Ashley. The village is filled with zombies infected with a parasite called Las Plagas. Leon, however, gets captured and gets injected with the parasite. He also finds Luis Serra, who used to be a researcher, and they both work together to escape. Leon then finds out that Ashley is held captive in a church and rescues her from there, and both escape. The leader of the cult, Osmund Sadler's master plan is revealed at this point, being controlling Ashley with the Las Plagas to manipulate and inject it into her father, the president, in hopes of conquering the world. Leon, however, manages to kill Mendez, the chief of the village, and he and Ashley takes refuge in a castle. They are attacked again by another antagonist named Ramon Salazar. Leon and Ashley are separated once again. Luis had searched up for pills that slow the infection along with the sample of the infection and brings them to Leon. However, he hands over the pills, but he gets killed by Sadler as the sample has been taken away. He then fights his way through the castle and kills Salazar. Leon meets Jack Krauser, a former associate of Leon, who was believed to have been killed by a helicopter crash 2 years ago, who is actually also responsible for the kidnapping and been working alongside Ada Wong to serve one of the main antagonists of the series, Albert Wesker. Krauser, being a mercenary, is ordered to kill Leon by Sadler, but Krauser faces the inevitable defeat and Leon manages to rescue Ashley. The Las Plagas inside Leon and Ashley's bodies are removed by a special device, and then with Ada's help, Leon kills Sadler. But however, Ada tricks Leon and takes the sample of the virus away. Leon and Ashley escape the island on a jet ski afterwards. So having a pretty promising and entertaining plot like that, and being one of the very special titles of the series by introducing new mechanics and gameplay, did the original game receive the attention and the praise it deserved? As a matter of fact, it did. The game was rated highly by all the video game critics out there in winning audiences' hearts and creating a new turning point in the Resident Evil series. Including all the versions of the game, more than 8 million copies have been sold worldwide. The game went on to be named as the Game of the Year at the Spike Video Game Awards, Game Informer, Matisu, and the Nintendo Power. It is still considered as one of the best video games of all time. So considering how successful the original game itself was, can we expect a remake? The answer is pretty clear, yes, but not anytime soon. The Resident Evil 2 remake was a huge success for Capcom, as they have also gone into remaking Resident Evil 3. This shows Capcom interest in the project. Speaking of the Resident Evil 3 remake, it is very noticeable that there wasn't much of the interval from the Resident Evil 2 remake release, meaning Capcom have been working on it for some time as well. Clearly Resident Evil 4 needs to get remade, as it is also 15-year-old and was one of the most influencing games of the 2000s decade, as it's redefined third-person shooter genre by introducing a new camera angles and the applications, and as it was also influenced a great deal in the survival horror genre by highlighting the mechanics of the reflexes and the precise aiming. The original game itself is a really good game with a decent graphics, mechanics, and decent gameplay, but it is still a 15-year-old, and considering it being a legendary game and the next gen of gaming is right around the corner, the game actually deserves a remake, and let's hope it gets one sooner than anyone expects. Thank you so much for watching, like and subscribe. I see you guys all later, and have a lovely day.